Again, we really appreciate you guys attending this webinar today, the title of which 5 Most Essential ServiceNow Enhancements for HR. And one of the reasons we wanted to do this webinar specifically is because we're talking with a lot of customers that have a few questions about using ServiceNow for HR, which we think is a really good idea. It's a very powerful tool, and it's a very diverse tool that has a lot of pluses already built into it automatically, and a lot of things you can do to make it even better and unique for your specific company. Just as a little bit of a heads up, we may run a little bit long on this webinar, but we're going to try not to. We have a lot to cover in this information, and if we were to do as much detail as we might need for all 5 types of enhancements, they could all be a webinar in themselves. So what we're going to try and do is discuss at some degree what's available for you to do, how to get started with that, and if you choose to ask any questions during the webinar or want to continue the conversation afterwards, definitely reach out to us and we would love to talk to you more about these things. As I mentioned before, you can ask questions throughout the webinar. We will be answering questions at the end, so if we don't answer you right away, still feel free to put them in as soon as it pops into your head, and we'll be happy to talk with you more. If we don't have time to cover every single question, we will be publishing the Q&A in full in a follow-up email to everyone who registered for the event, as well as a video of this event as well. And I think that's all the announcements I have for right now. Just to talk a little bit about Cerna Solutions. For those of you that don't know, we do specialize in ServiceNow consulting. We do implementations, integrations, unique product offerings such as Capio for automated testing and CernaDoc, which is an automated documentation tool. We focus on administrative services and automated testing and security operations management, among many other things. I also wanted to get our pitch out of the way a little bit earlier on. If any of you guys are interested in talking to us about our virtual admin services, that's very directly related to what we're doing today in this webinar. A lot of what we do with virtual admin are managed services. What that means is if someone has an admin that they're already using or don't actually have a ServiceNow admin for their company, we come in as an outside service to help you manage your ServiceNow instance, run certain projects that you may not be able to do either with your current abilities or with not having the training to do that. We have a number of standard and specialized offerings for that, some of which include HR, security operations, legal, facilities, marketing, and the obligatory much more. So if you would like more information on that, feel free to contact us or visit cernasolutions.com/virtualadmin. And to introduce Carrie right now, Carrie is our senior technical consultant. She'll be doing the presentation today. She's been with our company for a little over a year now, but she has been working in IT for over 20 years. She has certifications in ITIL, system admin, implementation, and she's a self-described process nerd, if that's okay for me to call you, Carrie.
Yeah, it's totally true. I came from kind of the help desk side, and so generally when you're down in the trenches like that, you have to use a lot of processes that other people have designed, and they kind of give to you, and they're like, here, do this. And so I've become really focused on getting the process right, because it's the people down in the trenches who will benefit if you get it right. So definitely a nerd.
Well, and having a process nerd on your side is always a good thing, and it's definitely going to help us out for talking about this today. So,
sure.
Carrie, you should have control of the screen. If not, let me know, and take it away.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about HR. Really excited about ServiceNow HR and what they're doing in the HR space, and hopefully we can get some of these conversations underway so that you guys can move towards building an awesome HR solution for yourself. So I'm just going to run through the agenda really quick, just the little pieces that we'll be talking about. We will talk a little bit about why ServiceNow is the tool that you want to use for HR. Of course, you can tell that that's the one that we believe in the most, so we'll talk about that why. So we'll talk about the service portal, which is a great piece that ServiceNow has introduced lately, so we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about integrations. ServiceNow can work with a lot of other applications, and we'll go over that. And then onboarding and offboarding, what discussion involving HR would be complete without a discussion of onboarding and offboarding, so we'll do a little bit of talking about that. And, oh, I have a little quickie problem here. Okay. I can't click. There we go. We'll talk about task sequencing, so getting everything in order so that it flows correctly and you have the right information when you want it. And then we'll wrap up with a little talk about how you can build yourself an open task checker to to make sure that all of your tasks are closed before you move on. And then, of course, like Tim said, we will do a little Q&A at the end, so please do put your questions in the question box on the webinar, and we will look at that and answer them. If not right here and now, we will definitely get some answers to you after. Okay. So why implement ServiceNow for HR? In fact, why implement any kind of HR automation at all? Recently, a study was done that 87% of organizations said that improving the employee service experience was important to them, that was a priority for their organization. And that at the same time, less than 40% of them thought that what they were doing with HR was good enough. So you can see that there's definitely a gap there. If you want to improve your employee experience, you're going to have to do something better with HR if what you're doing is not good enough. So focusing in on that employee experience piece, why is employee experience important? Frankly, you want your employees to stick around, right? You put money into recruiting them, into training them. They know their jobs, so you want to maintain their good feelings about the company. And one of the best ways that you can do that and make your employees feel supported is to have good processes, so that when they have to interact with other departments in your company, such as HR, it's an easy process for them. They know how to get there, they know what they need to do next, and it's easy and quick, and they can be done with it. Another reason to use ServiceNow for this is that HR automation is the way to go here, because a lot of companies, we've all been in companies that use emails and phone calls for everything. So, you have to talk to a person and ask that person to do the thing for you so that you can then move on to your next task. And ServiceNow gives you the capability to automate those things. So you can just put in the information, kick it off, and then it goes out and does that that talking for you. That will reduce the burden on your HR employees and make their jobs a little bit easier. Again, in the trenches, it's a good thing. And it allows them more time to think about, what they want to do next with HR, as opposed to having to focus on, this little process and all the fiddly bits. Okay, and also using ServiceNow for HR can help you simplify your process across the entire enterprise. A lot of organizations, the bigger ones, are using kind of different processes here and there for each of their different sections. And it's just simpler if you can kind of bring all of that together, and there's one process for everybody. You have a central repository for information, one place for people to look to get all of that information. So I'll click on that. There we go. If you're using multiple tools, you kind of need one place where you can pull all that information in together. And ServiceNow, especially if you're using it for HR, you already know ServiceNow is really versatile. You can do a lot of things with ServiceNow and build the solution that you want to build. Okay, so let's get right into the problems that we're going to try to solve today, or at least point you toward the solutions for. The first problem that we have noticed is that sometimes employees don't know how to get to your HR services. So you can have the most robust onboarding or PTO service in the world, but if your employees don't know how to get there or don't know how to use it, that's no good. So what ServiceNow does to kind of help with that, sorry, I should have clicked already. Okay, so why does this matter? Because if employees don't know how to get to where they need to go, then they're going to waste their time looking around for it. They're going to call people and ask, how do I do this thing? And they could be working, or they could be, one thing and click and then go away and do the jobs again. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them to get what they need so that they can go back to what they were doing. Okay, so what ServiceNow can do for you is ServiceNow has included an HR service portal, which if you've used IT, for ServiceNow for IT, you may be familiar with the service portal that's available for IT. This is very, very similar and can actually work in conjunction with Service Portal for IT. It's basically just a central place for an employee to come. They can, use the search bar to kind of search for what it is that they're looking for, or you can offer them specific things on the front page. Right out of the box, it works really well already. They give you a variety of widgets that you can use to implement, to customize. And then you also have the ability through custom development to create custom widgets if you want to. So these are just a couple examples. And then this is just a custom widget that we built. So it doesn't have to be complicated. It's just a chart that shows the active HR recruitment cases and makes that information available on the front page. So you can do that. This is just to show you, this is the service portal page out of the box. Like I've done 0 to this. You can see this is already functional. You've already got your search bar where you can look through whatever content is available. ServiceNow has already picked out a couple of things that they think will be the most useful to you. So you really could just put this in and go. But if you want to customize your own HR service portal, here's how you would get started. So you'd start here. You're going to make a list. You're going to make a list of all of the things that your employees actually use. What do they need? What do they need access to? What do they want to do? What are they asking you about? You know, what are the questions that they have? So make that big list, and then you're going to rank them in order of importance. So maybe maybe people are contacting you about PTO all the time, and you want to make that available to people. You want to make an article available on the front page. So you would kind of identify those things that are the most important to you. And you're going to pull out the top 3 or 5 or whatever, a small handful, and kind of make those available on the front page so that when they get to the front page, all they have to do is click the link and they go right to that important spot. There we go. Okay, so why do you need to use HR for this? Well, frankly, the service portal is like I said before, it's a game changer. Like it makes it completely easy for you to take this out-of-box thing that's already built and customize it a tiny bit to make it work for your employees so that your employees can get in there, make their choices, and then get back to work and have a better HR experience. Okay. Problem number 2, there are so many HR tools out there and so many that are already in use. So if your organization is already using something like Workday, you know, PeopleSoft, maybe somebody's still using PeopleSoft, Ceridian, maybe they're using ADP for payroll or some other kind of tracking. You have those tools out there and you have information in those tools. And so why is it important that there are so many tools? Let's take a look. So first of all, there's no central repository, so information is all over the place. You've got sensitive HR data living in a couple of different systems. Then you also have HR people who have to go to each of those systems to get the information that they need to get their work done. And sometimes they have to, you know, use multiple systems just to carry out one task, and that's no good. So how can we resolve that? HR integrations. The beautiful thing about ServiceNow, they have done a lot of work with some of these other companies to establish a framework for these integrations. So there's been a lot of research and documentation already. Certainly, Workday, they actually built a plugin. So you can just enable that plugin and put in some customization information, and then it will talk to Workday. And they're working on some of those things with some of these other important partners. Excuse me. So they are already working on that. They're really interested in connecting with all these different partners. But also, just ServiceNow being as versatile as it is, just about any application, if you can get data out of it, you can get that data into ServiceNow, whether it has a REST or SOAP interface, or even if you just have to export a spreadsheet, you can still take the data from where it is and put it into ServiceNow. In this case, ServiceNow would work then as your single system of record or your source of truth. So you can go to ServiceNow and see, you know, all of your users, all of your employees, excuse me, and then see all of the records that are associated with them. Okay, so ServiceNow integrations save you time. They save your HR folks time because they can just go to the one system, and then they kind of contain all of your HR data in one place, so that you don't have to go to all these different places to access it. And here's just an example of what a Workday integration might look like. So you can see that ServiceNow is kind of requesting information of Workday, and then Workday feeds that back into ServiceNow, and then ServiceNow connects back to Workday. So it's just, there's a flow back and forth. The information still lives in Workday, but it's being used in ServiceNow. Okay, so how do you get started with your ServiceNow integration? First of all, you need to figure out from both systems what information needs to be passed back and forth. So if you're talking about, say, Workday, maybe you're talking about passing user information. So you've got user records in Workday, you want to pass them over to ServiceNow. Just make a list. Again, I'm crazy about the list. Make a list and write down all the things that you want to pass back and forth. Then you need to determine how they can communicate, because you need to teach them to talk to each other. So if the system that you're trying to take the data from and put it in ServiceNow, if it has a REST or SOAP API available, which they should be able to tell you that, and frankly most current apps do have that, then you can set up an integration where nobody has to touch it and the information will just flow back and forth. Certainly also, if it's an older application, you can only get information out via spreadsheet. You can still use that information. You don't have to lose that information. You can get it out and put it into ServiceNow and use it in ServiceNow. And then once you know how both of those apps communicate, and once you know what information you want to pass back and forth, you want to make a field map. And so basically this is just a more detailed list of what information is coming across and where it's going to go. So which field is going to go into, on this side is going to go into which field on the other side. And so you would just write that out. And then you would do the coding and you know, complete the integration. So why would you use ServiceNow for this? ServiceNow actually has some pretty sweet capabilities to manage integration. Like I said earlier, they have a lot of APIs that they have already investigated, and a lot of documentation framework already in place so that you can do that. Okay. Problem number 3, onboarding, which is always the big bugaboo for HR, just because there are so many moving pieces, so many people involved with it, it's complicated. So why does onboarding matter? So a lot of organizations are using manual processes for onboarding. So if I'm, you know, have a new employee started, I'm going to call over to facilities and have them do a new ID card. I'm going to call over to telecom and have them get a phone over to that person's desk, etc. So it's a lot of manual work. It takes a lot of time to get that stuff done. It's reliant on spreadsheets and emails. So keeping track of all that information and making sure that all the tasks are being handled is usually a big hands-on process. And then it does open you up to risk, to a little risk for compliance issues, because you're sharing sensitive information maybe via email or via phone, instead of kind of keeping that close to your vest, which HR, you know, there's a lot of sensitivity around people's personal information. So it does open you up to some risk there. So the solution that we recommend in this situation is to develop an onboarding automation strategy, and we would use ServiceNow for this, of course. So how you would get started with something like that? Again, make a list. I sound like a broken record, but make a list of all of the things that you want to do. So make a list of everybody that has to be involved if someone's starting. Is it facilities? Is it telecom? Is it your desk side support that's going to deliver their computer? You know, who are the stakeholders? So who's the hiring manager, et cetera. So make a list of all these people and all of the process steps. Once you have that list, determine the order that it should go in. This, we'll touch on this just a second in the next issue, but it's important when things happen because you want to have the right information for the right people at the right time, right, so that they can do their jobs. And then the third thing that will come up when you're doing an onboarding thing is figure out when in your timeline the main account is created. Usually we're talking about an Active Directory account or something like that. And this is just a significant point in the onboarding timeline because that's kind of where everything else branches out from. So usually that's how you link back to that main account. And a lot of times when you're designing an onboarding process, you don't really think about what happens before that account gets created. So you need to devise a strategy for how you're going to maintain and connect the information that you have about that person before that account is created to everything that happens after the account is created. So why would you use ServiceNow for this? ServiceNow actually comes with some pretty robust workflows already for onboarding. A lot of it has been thought out, but of course it's always going to have to be customized to what your organization does. That's just the way it goes. No onboarding process is exactly the same for any two organizations. So, but you can take the work that they've already done and customize it slightly and just move forward and use that as your automation process. And ServiceNow is good for that. Okay. All right, so HR tasks completed out of order. I talked about this just a second ago. Why it matters is because if you do, say you get a task where you need a piece of information, you fill out everything that you possibly can, but you don't have that information, you're waiting on it, so then you set that task aside, you move on with your life so that you're not sitting here waiting for this task, and then you forget about it. It happens. So if you're doing the task and you don't have everything that you need before you carry out the task, tasks can fall by the way, can be not completed, it's not good. So And then, of course, it leads to a backlog of open tasks. It leads to confusion because someone has to follow up with that and, where are we at with this? What's happening? It leads to gaps in your data. So say you didn't have the email address yet and you couldn't put it into your system, then that's a hole in your data. Someone has to come by, after the fact and put that in. So that's no good. So our solution here is to set up a task sequencing fix. And so basically how to get started with that, make a list. You knew I was going to say that. So for each process, you're going to make a list of everything that has to happen in that process. And this doesn't have to be online. This can be a piece of paper and a pen, and you just write it out and you draw it out maybe in a little flow chart. That works really well for me. Again, giant process nerd. So make a list of everything that has to happen and what information is coming in and when that has to happen, when that information has to be there. And so for each of those processes, determine the process order, just like you did with onboarding. You could do this for any other HR process, and just determine the process order that you want them to happen in. And then one thing you might want to do is add a little task for follow-up, especially in the beginning when you're first starting to automate these task flows, so that someone at the end of the process can kind of check back with the employee and make sure that all of their concerns are addressed. Just to kind of make sure that the process is working the way that you want it to and help you identify any gaps. So why would you use ServiceNow for this? ServiceNow has this great built-in graphical workflow engine that really makes it easy to design process flows like this and to see them, because I need to see it. I need to see it on the screen to see what flows into the other thing. So you can definitely use ServiceNow for that to kind of build that out and watch it flow through the process. Okay, problem number 5. This is kind of a little bit of what we talked about in the last thing, but anytime that you've used a ticketing system, I'm sure that you've come across the issue of just having abandoned tickets, abandoned tasks that people, were going to get done and they'd set aside, and then they got busy on something else, and then they just kind of sat there. So you want to not have that. Why does this matter? If you have a case with a bunch of tasks on it, you think it's closed, someone could close it without all of those tasks being closed. That's no good. You got to make sure that everything is actually complete. Also, it's hard to know what the status is of the case if people are just going to, if a task has been abandoned for a really long time, someone has to go and follow up on that and figure out what happened with that. You can't just let it be. So how would you get started with this kind of thing? So what we're saying is what you can do to close the gap here is to build yourself an open task checker. And a lot of these things are done on the IT side too. So if you've ever done something like this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But basically, you need to come up with a strategy. How do you want to follow up? When do you want that to happen? How often do you want that to happen? And you need to determine who's going to be responsible for the following up. So is it the person who is assigned to the task, in which case you would create a scheduled job and it would go and poke that person every so often and say, hey, you haven't closed this task, could you close the task? Or, is it a manager then who comes through and looks at all the tasks that aren't closed and follows up with people? Or is it the kind of thing where you build in a rule before you close that HR case where it says, it checks all the tasks and it says, wait a minute, that task is still open, you can't close this case yet, which would then prompt someone to go and look for open tasks and follow up with that person. So you kind of have to determine how you want to do it, how often you want to do it, and then who is responsible for it. And then you just write code. So you can put it in a client script so it happens just at the moment of trying to close that case. You can put in a business rule so it happens after submit. Or you can write a scheduled job that will happen every so often. And not to toot our own horn, but we can help you do that. So that's certainly something that we can do with ServiceNow. And why do you use ServiceNow for that? Because then ServiceNow can do that work for you. You can tell it, I want you to check to make sure that this is done, and that way you don't have to have an employee go through every single one and look at all the open ones and be like, why is this happening, and follow up. So ServiceNow can do that groundwork for you and just make it a little bit less tedious. So that is the end of my, my talk today, and I just, Tim, do we have any questions maybe that we could answer for people?
Yeah, we did have a few questions come in, and I want to take this time real quickly to introduce a potential third voice. If you hear another voice other than Carrie or my own, we do have Garrett Griffin on the line, who's the head of consulting services for us as well. So feel free to throw the hardest question you can. Carrie and Garrett are definitely going to be more than enough to answer that question. As I give some people a chance to throw in some additional questions, I want to ask a question of my own that maybe you guys can speak to directly. I know that from my experience talking to both HR people and IT people, there can be a little bit of a conflict in trying to get these two teams on the same page. Do you think that, with a lot of the improvements in Istanbul for ServiceNow, that this is going to somehow facilitate a peace agreement between those two sections?
Boy, I definitely think so. I think having automation, well, okay, I think process can save the world, but I think that having automation in place on both sides, a process that everyone understands, is a huge step toward kind of getting those two sides to talk to each other. Garrett, feel free to jump in if you have other things to say. Nope. Okay. So
no,
yes.
I mean, I was going to agree with this, Carrie.
Sorry.
I think things are getting better along those lines with letting people work together. I work with some very large providers, and it can be tough, especially in the world of before Istanbul, right? So, but in Istanbul, and I think you mentioned it, but in case anybody wasn't paying attention, it's going to a scoped app, which means there's going to be a lot easier controls around IT not being able to make changes to the HR stuff or see their data and all of that, and you can give somebody permission just to develop in the HR app, so the IT kind of loosens up a bit and doesn't have to worry so much. But before that, with some of the biggest providers of, or I would say biggest users of the HR tool that I know of, their struggle. We have to have two different dev instances and move those up the stack to some single instances and stuff like that. But things are getting there because people are starting to realize the power of having a single workflow that easily says, hey, do the reference checks for onboarding and recruitment, and then actually go through and do the day one meeting and have that same workflow handle, get their laptop, get their desk, set up their phone, all that kind of stuff. And so it's getting there, but I agree, Tim, it's not a solved problem, but certainly the scoped app is going to make a big difference.
Okay. Now I have a question here from a customer that says they're currently using Helsinki and they are interested in getting started using HR, and Istanbul is probably on the roadmap, but they were thinking about doing HR first. What are your recommendations for that?
Boy, one thing I would say is that since, as Garrett mentioned, since they're going to a scoped app in Istanbul, the first thing I would recommend is to upgrade to Istanbul before you start on an HR project. Just because if you don't, you're going to be kind of having to build your project and then also port it over to the scoped app, and you don't want to have to kind of do that extra effort. Also, there are just a lot of cool features in the scoped app. There are some things around task sequencing that make it simpler. And ServiceNow, in kind of rewriting some parts of the app, has tried to make it simpler for HR so that they don't really need IT as much to maintain the app, so that someone in your HR admin can actually do that. So definitely the upgrades in Istanbul are worth going ahead and moving up to Istanbul before you start your project.
Okay.
Definitely. 100% like what Carrie said. As far as we know, that once you get to Istanbul, just for anybody that doesn't know, there won't be the same concern with Jakarta. So if you want to go to Istanbul now, which is already available and out, you can do that. When Jakarta comes out, there's going to be some things to make your lives easier in HR, but it's not going to require, from our understanding, it won't require a ton of rework, since Jakarta comes out in just like a month or two.
So Garrett, if someone were to implement HR now and put in a lot of that work and effort to build up their HR in Helsinki, but then they skip Istanbul into Jakarta, would they still have that difficulty porting that information over, or would you still recommend waiting until Istanbul to really start on your HR application?
Oh, and thank you. Yeah, for the clarification, the work is going to need to be done one time, regardless if you do it on Jakarta or so if you're on Helsinki and you implement everything now before you go to Istanbul, at some point after upgrading to Istanbul or upgrading to Jakarta, upgrading to K-Release, at some point you're going to have to probably redo everything you've done. And getting your data over there is going to be tough. So if you can wait until Istanbul or just wait till you upgrade to Istanbul, definitely wait. There is no reason, absolutely no reason to go forward before that. So hopefully that helps clarify, Tim.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I had another question about the task sequencer and what's involved with implementing that after the steps that you had already mentioned.
So okay, so once you have your list of tasks, I think I touched on this for just a second, but so in the current version in Helsinki, it's a workflow engine. So you could spread out your task plan and make your task plan in the graphical workflow module. In the later versions, in Istanbul and Jakarta, or maybe it's just in Jakarta, but it's in the later versions coming up, there is a task sequencer built into each task, and a way that you can kind of designate what order the task should go into on the task itself. And so the intention there is to make it simpler for your HR folks so that they don't have to, learn how to use graphical workflow engines and go in and figure out how that works. They can just say, I want this to happen in this and this and this. So it is a bit of a different way of doing it, but hopefully will be simpler for HR.
Definitely. And to add on to that, just for clarification, if you went in Helsinki right now and tried to do it, like Carrie said, it's using the graphical workflow engine right now. This premise of having this list of tasks isn't there currently. That's something that's going to be there, starting in Istanbul, et cetera, as you upgrade. And the other, for anyone that isn't catching the vision of why that's going to be helpful, in addition to allowing, say, your HR people to help set up these workflows and lists of tasks, it also allows them, as they go into the future, of saying, only do this task for somebody in, say, Europe, or only do this task for somebody that is in California. Because we all know as we do onboarding and offboarding, there's far different legal requirements for what we need to do to handle people in different countries. And something we must do in Europe could, in fact, not even be allowed for us to do in California. Probably a bad example, but you understand the purpose. So that's kind of the vision, if you can see that as well.
Well, yeah, that makes total sense because part of an HR company that's working even in just one country, an HR department that's just in America but has employees in 50 states. Right now, other than a robot like ServiceNow that knows how to just automatically check for those things, they just need an expert who knows all of those things, or someone that has enough time to sit and research that. So I think that's a huge issue. I have another question here. Will there be any sort of migration tool or process to help us with the upgrade from Helsinki to Istanbul or Jakarta?
Right now, ServiceNow is talking about that. Right now, there is not a tool in place. I believe that they're thinking of it as more of a manual process of moving information over and porting processes over by kind of redeveloping them. But that's certainly a concern for them as well, and they're thinking about it. So certainly that's the kind of thing that you might want to bring up with your ServiceNow rep, and the more people that talk about it, probably the more they will focus on making that a tool.
Definitely, and I'm going to go ahead and throw in there, Carrie, that you're right. They keep talking about it, and I think ServiceNow really wants to put something in place
I think so too.
to help with that. Yeah, but we haven't seen it yet, right? And so we're still all kind of waiting on that, but yet Istanbul's already out. So in the meantime, we got to plug our own stuff here. I will mention we've got something new that people can reach out to talk to us about, and that's what we're calling Cerna Doc. And it's a great ability for us to be able to easily document your system, including what you're doing in HR. So when you need to rebuild it, if you're in that position of rebuilding and migrating to Istanbul, you can look at the Cerna Doc. It's going to say, hey, these are all the business rules you have on HR case, HR task. These are all the UI policies, all your service catalog items. And it kind of gives you an idea of, okay, for HR, this is the stuff I need to go ahead and take and re-implement in Istanbul, and helps you come up with that checklist and the level of effort for how long it's going to take.
Yeah, that'd be a valuable tool if you're approaching something like that kind of migration.
So for right now, if someone is in Helsinki and they make the shift over to Istanbul and they already have their HR system set up there, from what I understand, and I'm not as technical as you guys, but what I understand, they have an old legacy HR app that does go with you but doesn't quite work the same, right? It's just there for you to kind of use to rebuild in that new system. Is that correct or fair to say?
Right. Yeah, they include the legacy app, and as far as I know, it's still. I thought that it was still functional, so
It is.
It is, but there will be a point, like just with every migration, right? There will be a point where that stops being supported, and where you really want to move forward. So, like Garrett said, at some point you will want to move to the new stuff.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, because
and if you're using Istanbul
like,
and not using all those features, it doesn't really make sense.
That's
exactly.
the other thing. Yeah, you don't want to be in Istanbul and not be able to use the things that they've designed that can help you out. So.
Yeah, and to put a more concrete time frame on that for perspective, Fuji went out of support back in January, and Geneva is going to go out of support here soon as Jakarta comes out. So I believe it's like, is that like a 3-release window, so that say if you're on Helsinki and they're on the L release, your Helsinki stuff, they'll no longer help you out on the high server. So you're going to need to move forward. Like Carrie said, the old version of HR is still fully functional as we move forward. They've said it will stay functional, but they're not going to keep supporting it. Nothing new is going to be built on top of it. So at some point, in my opinion, before you go to the K release, you need to move to the new HR scope stuff. So hopefully you haven't even started yet, and you can just start on Instant fresh. But if you have otherwise, that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you can start now and make all your lists. You can start that without any application.
Oh, yeah.
Just start making lists.
Carrying your list.
I know. I love that.
All right, guys. We're almost 10 minutes past the half-hour mark. I appreciate everyone that stayed on with us. We're going to leave the webinar open for just a few more minutes in case anyone else does want to throw some additional questions at us. Like I said, we may not have time to answer them right now, but we will be sending out a recording, the slide deck, as well as a full list of any Q&A items that came through for everyone to take a look at. Again, thank you everyone for joining this webinar. We really appreciate you taking the time. Garrett mentioned Cerna Doc, which means I'll go ahead and include some additional information on that as well for automated documentation for ServiceNow from Cerna Solutions. And thank you guys, and have a great day. Thanks, Carrie. Thanks, Garrett.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.